Good evening, everybody. This is Cinnamon Noir.
And this is the Ramen Shaman.
Welcome to the penultimate episode of Alwa's Awakening. We're just rocking out a little here. So this is the Amethyst Passage. Now I have all of the things that are needed to get in, which are the upgraded block, the upgraded bubble, and the, I forget what the key was called. It may have just been called the Amethyst key. Anyway, as you can see to the left, we do need that key, because there's a locked door right here. The Amethyst Passage is interesting. It's one of the shortest dungeons in the game, yet it's also one of the most difficult. One new thing is this guy, who's an upgraded version of the red fox guy we saw elsewhere. He's actually easier, though, than his earlier cousin. I don't know why they did that.
Ask, how is he upgraded exactly?
I shouldn't even really have called him upgraded, it's just he appears later in the game. He's a downgraded version. He shoots fireballs at you that you can easily dodge. The other guy would set you on fire if you stayed in one place, which I guess staying in one place is pretty easy to avoid. So I guess technically this guy's harder, but not really.
Nah.
It's the kind of thing where when you're designing it, it seems like it might be harder, but in the actual practice of playing the game, it is not.
Normally playtest these things, but
well,
I guess the issue with playtesting is it's hard to replicate the first time experience.
I can't even be entirely sure that they intended for him to be harder. They might just have wanted him to be different. Anyway, here's something I noticed this playthrough that I did not notice in the last one. The hole in the ceiling here, which unfortunately, because I misplaced my bubble, I did not manage to get into. It's a little annoying. You have to place this really well. You have to basically almost go off the edge, or you can just place the block like I did. It's surprising how often they ask you to do that, really, when you might not be expecting to be, too. Anyway, it just leads to an orb. It's just a bonus, so... I don't know why I'm collecting these orbs. Like I said, I think, a couple episodes ago, by the time you get to 50, it's really not worth it to collect any of the rest. Because the next one is all of them. Which on the one hand seems a little extreme, but on the other hand, it's such a game-breaking advantage that I can see why they wouldn't keep ratcheting it up, you know, for every 10 or so.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a tight jump between spikes there. We also have a tough one in here. You gotta leap over all these spikes in order to get that. I believe...
Ow.
Well, I didn't manage it. Anyway, I believe you can just float up through the hole in the middle, but if you do that, obviously you'll miss out on the orb. I'm not entirely sure, actually. I've never tried it. So what you should do in here is actually start a bubble when you're on the block and ride it up just a little way and then jump off. Don't ride it up too far, because you do still need to be able to clear the top row of spikes, but... That little thing in the left bottom corner of that room is actually very interesting. It's a hidden code panel that tells you some secret stuff about this game. And very few people who've played this game have been able to get to it. It's one of the game's best kept secrets. It is so well kept that I have not figured it out, and so you're not going to see it in this playthrough. I do know a few things about it. There was actually a code that appears in 3 parts in this game that leads to a password for a website that the creators of this game set up, like a fan site. I've never been to it. In fact, I tried the fully completed code on a link to the website, but I think that its domain may have expired, or maybe they're just not doing it anymore, so.
I wonder, I'm sure you didn't test this, but is it possible to get yourself deliberately killed by that guy by, like, setting up your bubble in such a way that you're between it and him?
Well, 2 things. One, you may have noticed that there's a skull in that room, which means one of the protectors should be there, but we didn't see anything. I was a little confused by that. We're just going to move on. Second, as to your question, those things don't hurt you. They only pop the bubble. So no, it is not possible to get hurt by them. Even
if that projectile they shoot did hit you,
it doesn't hurt you. No, it's programmed just to hit your bubble. They're the opposite of the red fish heads. The red ones will hurt you. The blue ones can just hurt your bubble. Anyway,
I think it would almost be cooler if there were, like, some specific thing for, like, dying to one of those guys. What the fuck? Sorry.
You mean like an achievement? Anyway.
I was just like...
That is the Eye of the Beholder. Incredibly bad, wordplay. But yeah, that's what that is. We're going to pick it up in a little bit. It's the last major upgrade in the game. I'll give you a hint. It's related to the fact that we weren't able to see the boss before in that other room.
Ah.
That he didn't appear to be there.
Ah.
Anyway, we need to climb up Solstice Mountain for 2 reasons. 1, we need to get to the village at the top where we'll get some useful advice. And 2, we need to work our way through its labyrinth in order to get that upgrade. But we're also going to unlock a little shortcut while we're here. I don't know if you remember, but we've actually visited Solstice Mountain once before. It was when we were going through Void Tower, and we came out in a little corner of this map, which we couldn't get out of because there was a door blocking us. But now we can hit this one-way switch and open it up.
I don't think I remember that, but
Anyway,
okay.
so now it's fairly easy to get between Void Tower and Solstice Mountain.
But anyway.
Very Dark Soulsy. I killed this guy for no appreciable reason, because we're not going to do anything in Void Tower in this episode. There are more things you can do in Void Tower once you've gotten the upgraded bubble, but since this is not a 100% run, we won't be doing that. It's just
Fair
for
enough.
orbs. There's really nothing else you can get besides orbs. One unfortunate thing in late game exploration, but, you know, this is a simple game. I don't
True.
expect it to be mind-blowing, or to give you an amazing reason for revisiting old areas. The fact that they give you a reason to revisit old areas at all is above many games of this type. Anyway, we're now going back into Solstice Mountain proper. Solstice Mountain is interesting. The surroundings of it are this weird sort of battlement thing, but it's supposed to be very earthy. You know, it looks a lot like Central Alwa, with the, you know, little stubby trees and the dirt.
Yeah.
I don't know why the castle is here. This little keep. I guess maybe it's supposed to be an outgrowth of the Amethyst Passage. Which, the Amethyst Passage is the one place in the game which, even though it's clearly a building, does not seem to have a clear purpose. Like, why would you build a passage?
Yeah, good question.
It could just be a natural environment, but anyway. Oddly enough, it kind of reminds me of the... Have you ever played Rayman 3?
I don't think I ever have.
There's a part of that game that's called The Longest Shortcut. That's the name of the chapter, but I also think it might be the name of the place. You have to get to a place where the villain is going quicker than him. So the fairies give you access to this longest shortcut, which is a bunch of platforming challenges, basically. And it's got this really weird aesthetic to it. It's one of my favorite parts of the game. That's a very underrated game, Rayman 3, I have to say. Has some great humor and some great level design.
Is that the one with, the hoodlums?
That's right. The evil lums.
I think I actually remember starting playing.
Yeah, I think that's the experience of a lot of people, like renting it. Anyway, so this is Dark Moon Village. This is where all of the ornaments were kept before Vicar stole them. Just
Dark
again,
Moon.
just reminding us of the weirdness of this game's translation.
Yeah, I guess the name Dark Moon isn't that original, but
No, not at all.
it's appeared. I can think of at least once in Dark Souls lore that
Yeah,
Dark
right.
Moon has appeared.
Not to be confused with Dark Sun Gwendolyn. It's Dark
yeah,
Moon Gardens,
actually
isn't
it's
it?
related to.
Oh no, it's Dark
Gwendolyn.
Root Garden. Or is it Dank
Yeah,
Root
Dark
Garden?
Root Garden. No,
Dank
it's actually
Meme
Dark
Garden?
Souls 3.
Yeah, there was a Dank
Yeah.
Meme Garden in Dark Souls 3. Now I remember.
No, there was not.
Anyway.
I don't think there was. But no. In Dark Souls 3, there was. It's actually. I think it's like. I think. There's actually a group called Blades of the Dark Moon, which I think
Oh.
is founded in memory of Gwendolyn.
I find it interesting that in a lot of these foreign fantasy-styled stuff, they like just sewing lots of words together. You know, like it's all German or something. You know, we all know the Japanese do have a fondness for some German stuff. Like Rosenkreuzstilett, for instance. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I think, I suspect, like, I know, Western mythology was a big part of what inspired, Hidetaka Miyazaki, but I think particularly, I think he probably had some strong German influences between, like,
Well, tons of his characters have German names, for one thing.
Sigmire of Katarina.
Yeah, right. Now, Sigmire is not a real German name, but it does sound like it should be a German name.
Yeah.
Sigmund and Siglinda are both German names, but not Sigmire.
I'm trying to remember if he had a...
Also not
his daughter,
Sid Meier.
He had a daughter, I think she might have been called Sieglinde.
Really? I think his daughter should have been called Katarina. I mean, that would make sense.
No, I think Katarina is his homeland.
She could have been called Katarina of Sigmire. That would have actually made sense. Anyway. I'm not saying Dark Souls doesn't make sense. It doesn't, but I'm not saying that.
Nah.
Anywho. So, we just fell down that area and got an orb. Now we have created a circuit back through here by opening up that shortcut. I'm just saving the game to make sure I don't... Well, honestly, to make sure I don't lose my flask here. There wasn't much danger of my dying because, you know, with the flask you have 6 hearts. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we now have to fall down this little hole. And this leads us to a little twisted... I would call it a labyrinth, but it's not really one because there's no way to get lost here. It's just like an ant trail or something.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I really do not know how to get to this guy without getting hurt, so I'm just going to do the simple thing and push a block into him. Which, he seems very nonplussed about it, but, you know, he can't really do anything about it.
I wonder if that's how you're supposed to do it.
I have no idea. Sometimes in this game, it honestly seems like you're just expected to take the hit.
I've heard that kind of happens with the game Trine. You can do really weird things with physics objects.
I've never played Trine myself.
I've played part of it. I didn't get very far, and I don't think it was difficulty so much as I just wasn't
boredom.
Well,
it was difficult to keep my eyes open while playing this game.
The combat kind of lost me because the sword controls are really awkward. I remember that.
Yeah, so when something as basic as a sword, you gotta make sure you get it absolutely polished or it's gonna feel terrible. That's something that Skyward Sword taught me.
Yeah, well. I was gonna say Dark Souls 2, although that wasn't that unpolished.
Do you mean Dark Souls as well, or Dark Souls 2 as well?
The second Dark Souls game.
Oh, okay, great.
Which was a bit lacking in polish compared to its predecessor and successor.
It's interesting you say lacking in polish, because I feel like the one thing it should have had was polish, because it didn't have novel ideas, you know? And it was made without the original guy, but it was made by a big company, so shouldn't have had polish but not novelty, but instead you say it lacked polish, which is a big failure, I would say.
Mechanically, it definitely lacked polish.
Yeah, that's just a shame, I think. That's really sad when a big company can't even do that right.
From what I understand, it was an extremely troubled production, and they got like really over ambitious and ended up like.
Makes sense. Probably why there's a lot of lore in that game that has like it doesn't go anywhere.
Well, apparently, it ended up being just a friggin' miracle that they managed to like salvage what they had. And make something
dubious miracle.
Competent.
Oh, well, I shouldn't complain. People like it.
I like it. Honestly.
So notice something different about this room now.
For all my bitching about it,
there was a door that we couldn't see. That's what the enemy was behind. Oh, so here's the guy we rescued. The guy who said he would help us out. The way he helps us out is he just told us what the boss is like, even though here we can see it. So he sucks.
Thanks.
There's no real reason to rescue him. Except maybe, you're a nice person, but who does that? This isn't Undertale. Anyway, so this is a very strange boss fight. It proceeds in multiple stages, and of course, the boss is this giant statue in the right-hand side. It is only weak for brief periods when one of the 2 eyes are open. I didn't even realize this the first several times I played through this, but the one on top is vulnerable when it's doing its attack, in addition to the one on the bottom. For some reason, I never saw the eye on top. I just assumed because it was so small that it was not a weak point. Or maybe it was just because this attack is so daunting that I figured, like, why even bother trying to hit it?
Yeah.
Anyway, with this boss, I think they expected you to move around a lot and, try to get to a vantage point, maybe hit that eye on top. Unfortunately, what I have found to be the most efficient way to beat this boss is really boring. You just put that cube right where I've put it, hide on the bottommost platform, hit these guys in exactly the order I've shown, and make sure you use the lightning bolt to hit those two so that you'll be able to hit the eye when it comes out. And then just fire off a lightning bolt at the eye when it pops up. Or rather, a few seconds before it pops up, because it's actually a surprisingly tight window.
You know, it's funny that in our last video I was just bitching about how unchallenging cover-based shooters are.
Yeah, that's what this is. This is a 2D cover-based shooter.
Yep.
If you didn't think cover-based shooters could be any more tedious, imagine them in 2 dimensions. No, it's sad, because really, aesthetically, this is the most interesting boss in the game. And this is kind of cool, if I'm being honest. I like the aesthetic. But mechanically, it's probably the most boring. Because the best way to beat it is just not worth it. Sorry, I should say.
Yep.
The best way to beat it is boring. And the way that would be interesting is not worth it.
Yeah.
I can think of several ways they might have improved this boss. One is to make the hitbox on that eye slightly bigger.
Oh.
Another is not to put water there, because they should have known I'd die, and that would really be frustrating. And it would make me curse them.
I hate that when you've got a boss that you're choosing it, you're whittling itself down slowly but steadily.
Yep.
It's almost there, and then you, like, slip up and die.
Yep. It happens. Anywho. So yeah, it's just a tedious fight. You haven't played a lot of 2D games in recent years, have you?
Not really.
I was gonna ask you...
Iconoclasts.
Yeah, right. I was gonna ask you, what's your least favorite 2D boss that you've fought? Maybe if you remember from the old days.
Good question.
Because this might actually be mine.
I'm trying... For some reason, I'm flashing back to, Kirby's Dream Land and the original Wario Land for the plain Game Boy. I can't think of any, like, really infamously bad bosses.
I have never even played original Wario Land, and I know how bad those freaking bosses are. I have seen playthroughs. They're awful. I don't know what they were thinking when they designed the original Wario Land.
I mean, that's the funny thing. I don't remember the bosses being that bad or that difficult.
Now, my game of choice of that series when I was younger was Wario Land 2, which I played a lot. And those bosses were tough, but they were interesting, which is, it's at least something.
Yeah. I mean, the bosses weren't terribly interesting in the first one.
So, I was very careful to use the bubble to get over here because, honestly, the first time I played through this game, I beat him and then I fell in the water again.
Oh.
And this game does not save progress with that. You gotta fight him again if that happens.
Oh, okay, that's bullshit. Like,
that's a pain in the ass.
Certain games I will not stop bitching about. They will actually count a boss as beaten if you, like, die while killing the boss.
Yeah, right. Which I think is only fair, but those are games where the expectation is that they will save progress as you make it. Whereas this is an old-fashioned game where progress is saved when you get to a progress-saving area and not before. Anything that happens in this game is reversible if you don't manage to save after you've done it. Which is a big reason why anyone who's planning to Let's Play it like me, or just wants to have a simple playthrough, would totally turn on the cheating feature, where you just respawn in the same room when you die, because otherwise it's horrible. I understand their position, they want to be purists, but I think they realized, deep down in their hearts that it's tedious because they put the cheating option in the game. It's not like I hacked this or anything. This was an expected thing.
I mean, I feel like you should never put a bad element from old 8-bit, from classic games, in your classic game recreation just because it's a classic.
I know, but unfortunately that is kind of what they were going for here. There's sort of a old-style, warts-and-all approach to this, which I appreciate because it leads to some interesting choices, even though some people might consider them frustrating. Like, the difficulty level of this game is pretty high in terms of platforming and stuff like that.
I kind of prefer things like, to go back to Shovel Knight.
Shovel Knight.
Always
the Shovel Knight.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I don't...
No, I'm like that too. I appreciate it.
gotten that. I haven't gotten that much into it personally, but I think it's better to. It represents significantly better design than many of the platformers it's aping because it.
I would agree with that. And considering that
because it knows what isn't platform.
And considering that Shovel Knight is based on Mega Man, I can come right out and say I've played a number of Mega Man games, and Shovel Knight is better than all of them.
I've never played Mega Man games. I only know what I've heard, which is that some of them are just really ruthlessly hard.
Well, I can confirm that for you. They are. So anyway, we now have all 4 ornaments, and we can go into the final dungeon. But we're not going to yet, because this is the penultimate episode. What we're going to do instead is go over to do an optional dungeon on the right-hand side.
Of course.
Oh yeah. Gotta do that. This isn't 100%, but it's 100% of the interesting content in this game, I'll put it that way. That would be a good category, in my opinion. Like 100% minus boredom. I don't know exactly how you would put it, but...
Yeah.
It wouldn't be a speedrun category, obviously. But there's lots of different types of Let's Plays. So, we've been in Gloom Lake before. Gloom Lake is where the Shrine of Sea Monk is. And oddly, because it doesn't seem quite fitting thematically, it's also where the entrance to the final boss is.
Huh.
But also, now that we have the Eye of the Beholder, we can go to the Lost Cemetery again. I think we might have visited it once. But now we can get over this, pit of green fire. Mm-hmm. This is probably the creepiest place in the whole game, actually, even counting the final dungeon.
So wait, do those eyes you were using as platforms only appear?
That is correct. They're invisible if you don't have the Eye of the Beholder.
That is really cool, just because, as I've told you, personally, I've been on a Bloodborne kick recently. And 2 major themes in that game. One is eyes, but another one is things becoming not only visible but tangible as you gain enough insight to.
Which is based on Lovecraft. Yeah, things like the what is it called? Amygdala. Or amygdala,
yes,
as he calls it, even though that's ungrammatical. Anyway, if you're wondering what I'm doing here, what I did to make the lantern turn blue actually opened up a secret warp room. But I got confused and thought it was a warp room that you warp to from here. What it actually is a warp room you can warp to from any of the other warp rooms in the game.
Oh.
So that's one thing we can do here. I think we'll see that in the final video. But what we're really here for is to go to the Tomb of Kloski.
Huh.
Which is an oddly Anglo-Saxon sounding name.
Mm-hmm.
But, whatever. They're Scandinavian, the people who made this. They're weird. I just recently found out, actually, today, in fact, that, the children's show Lazy Town? Have you heard of it?
I think so.
Oh, anyway, it's really bizarre, and I've seen it in a lot of YouTube parody videos. It's made in Iceland, which explains why it's so freaking weird. Anyway, so there is a secret hidden wall or door in here somewhere, which I'm looking for, but having a lot of trouble finding.
Yeah, that would be kind of annoying.
I guess it must not be a hidden door. It must be a hidden wall of some kind. There we go. I should have said it's a false floor that you fall through.
Ah.
So, this optional dungeon, oddly enough, is a lot easier than some of the dungeons we've been dealing with lately. This is probably the one really hard platforming challenge you have. You gotta drop that block just right and then jump in the other direction. Which, actually, we also saw earlier in this video in the Solstice Mountain.
That is clever.
Another somewhat difficult thing is these little ghosts that chase you around. But if you're smart, what you'll do is just never kill them, and kite them around, and then they won't be able to respawn, and you can get them in a corner.
Ah.
You can do that in the other room. Obviously, in this one, it's a little harder. But you can still just avoid them. They don't move that fast. Mm-hmm. They do move faster than you, though, which is something to consider.
Yep.
Anyway, 2 wizards, no big deal. And these, in fact, are even less of a big deal than most because you can just get right up next to them.
They don't seem... I was going to say, the ghosts don't seem that hard to just swat, though.
They're not.
Although it would be frustrating to have them, respawn.
If, they were making this game with more of an intent to be, really clever about it. I would suggest that this should have been the point where they had a big combat challenge. Like maybe a few new enemies, or a big assemblage of hard-to-dodge enemies in one room. Instead, it's just a fairly simple dungeon that kind of replicates a lot of the earlier content. But, you know, again, I got this game cheap, so I don't complain about it. And it's unique, you know? You were mentioning Shovel Knight earlier. One of the things I like about this game is it has an aesthetic and a style that is kind of like Shovel Knight, and that is not at all easy to find. You know, a lot of people who go for retro pixel graphics do not go for this really detailed style of pixel graphics. They go for stuff that looks pixely, which in my opinion looks like crap. I much prefer the sort of, you know, splitting the difference between 8-bit and 16-bit style.
Mm-hmm. Which looks like prettier 8-bit.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think that the Sega Master System could make graphics that look like this. Like it was a little better than the NES. I'm not 100% sure, but it did come out later than the NES, so it's possible. Not that people remember the Master System anyway, certainly not in the United States. It wasn't until the Genesis that Sega really started developing a following here. Anyway, so this is it for the penultimate episode of Alwa's Awakening. In the next one, we will be going back to the little warp zone in the middle of Gloom Lake and heading up into the final dungeon, which is going to be quite a gauntlet, actually. I guess I can just spoil this right now. It's multiple levels stacked on top of each other of platforming challenges. So I'm sure I'll be looking forward to that, and I hope you will too. Good night, everybody.
It sounds like Tower of Heaven. Good night, everybody.
It is a little bit.